Don't ignore the subtext. It's on us to intervene in sexual assault. Because we can. Take the pledge at itsonus.org.
Just glad you guys didn't boo me. It's now my honor to introduce a surprise guest tonight. Not that surprise guest yet. It's my honor to introduce Pittsburgh Steelers cornerback, Super Bowl champion, and longtime advocate for domestic violence awareness, William Gay. William uses his platform as a pro football player to bring awareness to domestic violence. In 2014, William was named Steelers Walter Payton Man of the Year, an award that recognizes the players off the field. His off-the-field community service as well as his playing excellence. During the off-season, William volunteers for local women's shelters in Pittsburgh, where he listens to survivor stories and plays with the children who are there because they have escaped dangerous situations with their mothers. He's also collaborated with Verizon for their Hope Line campaign, which collects used wireless phones and accessories to benefit victims and survivors of domestic violence. Williams' activists can be seen both on and off the field, as he's appeared alongside 23 other NFL players in the No More public service announcement to help end domestic violence. In 2015, William was fined for wearing purple cleats during a game against the Kansas City Chiefs. In an interview, William said, "I put them on knowing well I could be fined. Despite the threat of a hefty fine, William made a courageous choice to wear them anyway to highlight October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month." William has also been vocal about the need to educate men who continually perpetrate violence against women. Please give a round of applause for Mr. William Gay.
We got a theme song and everything. I'm very excited to be here today as we come together to help erase domestic violence and sexual assault in our society. Violence against women is dear to me because my mother was shot and killed by my stepfather, which turned my life upside down. To me, awareness is everything. I want to get people talking about domestic violence and sexual assault so that someone like my mother can someone like my mother know that someone can save them. People need to know that this is happening and that there is help out there for the victims. Like football and any other sport, the Greek system is a brotherhood, a sisterhood, and a family. So with that responsibility, we need to stand up for what's right and make this world a better and safer place for everybody. I am honored here today with a man who has devoted his life on ending violence against women. As the author of the Violence Against Women Act, Vice President Joe Biden made it his mission to change the culture so that domestic violence and sexual assault is unacceptable in our society. He and I share the same passion for this cause. He is not letting up, and neither am I. I am proud to introduce to you guys Vice President Joe Biden.
Thank you for having me. And before I begin, excuse my back. I'm sorry. It was very impolite. And I was telling William in the back, my Walter Mitty dream wasn't to be standing before you as a former vice president or anything holding public office. I wanted to actually, I actually thought I could play professional football. I don't know what was the matter with me, but I was not bad in high school and college. I had soft hands. By the way, I want you to meet another guy. You've been introduced yet? Come here, big guy. Come on, come on, come on. Come here. I just want you to know, this guy's a professional wrestler, former professional football player, but don't screw around with me. He's me. I want you to know. Why don't you tell him why you're here?
I am here for several reasons, but number one, I am also affected by domestic violence. My mother was raped at 11 years old, had me at the age of 12. She was supposed to be, she was driven from St. Augustine, Florida, down to Boynton Beach, Florida, to have an abortion, and she jumped out of the car, ran into the hospital, and 2 weeks later she ended up having me. So 40 years later, I am up here with the former Vice President of the United States of America.
I didn't mean to embarrass you.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
And by the way, when I was playing, University of Delaware won the national. All right, won the national championship in Division II, and the biggest guy on our team, was first-team All-American, was a linebacker at 242 pounds. I tell you what, if I was playing today, I'd be dead. When Delaware won the national championship, the first year I was vice president, the offensive line averaged 306 pounds. I don't know what the hell happened, man. I'd never made it, so fortunately I didn't have the skill to get killed. Folks, look, let me begin by saying, I was backstage, I could hear some of the victims and survivors talk about their experience. And you saw these two guys talk about their experience. I know from having not experiences with, thank God, my mother or anyone in my family being sexually abused, but I know what it's like when you have to get up and talk about, no matter how long ago it happened, what's happened to you. It brings it all back like it's today. I lost a wife and daughter. I got a phone call when I got elected to the United States Senate as a 29-year-old kid saying my wife and daughter are just killed. Tractor trailer broadside them. I just lost my son, Bo, to cancer. He's Attorney General and a Rising Star and a Bronze Star winner and decorated soldier for a year in Iraq. And you know, when you talk about it, even though you're day-to-day you're okay, it brings it all back, man. And so to the survivors, I say thank you. Thank you for your bravery. I'm not being, this is not hyperbole. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for willing up. When you speak out, you give so many young girls as young as 14 years old, you give so many girls and women reason to hope. They look at you and say, maybe I can make it. Maybe I can make it. So thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you know, we also know that, you know, William told you why he got involved. Because I've been so passionate about this subject for so long, the press 25 years ago when I wrote this legislation, no one wanted to hear about it, thinks that, well, maybe it's because my passion was generated by my mom being victimized. My passion was generated by my dad, who was a decent, honorable man, who used to say that the greatest sin anyone could commit was the abuse of power, whether it's economic, whether it is political, whether it is physical. And he'd say the cardinal sin of all sins was for a man to raise his hand to a wife or to a woman or a child. And he meant it. I was raised by a dad who was, as I said, a gentle man. Never raised his hand to any one of us. The worst thing my father could say to you was, you disappoint me. And it was like being hit with a thunderbolt. But my dad taught us to intervene, my brothers and I. If you see it, Joey, intervene. You have an obligation. If you see it and you know it, and you don't do anything about it, you're complicitous. Silence is consent. Consenting to what's happening to an innocent person if you know it's happening. And so, Ryan, your call to action inspired me because we need men like you. I look out there and I see so many future leaders and present leaders assembled in this group that want to change society. The Association of Fraternal Leadership and Values, and as well as the National Black Greek Leadership Conference, we need you all. We need you all, badly. And I'm here today to talk about how our culture enables, our present culture enables violence against women to persist. We have a cultural problem. I'm often asked why, as I said, I'm so passionate. I told you why I'm so passionate. Because it is the ultimate abuse of power. Most of it's about power. It's not even about sex. It's about domination. And so, folks, you're getting together, fraternities and sororities, is a big deal. If you have an older brother or sister belonging to the same fraternity or sorority you did 5, 10 years ago, this would never happen. This wouldn't happen 10 years ago. It didn't happen 5 years ago. And it clearly didn't happen 25 years ago, or a little longer when I wrote the legislation. Over the past months, well, actually over this past week, we have just seen abusers of the highest ranks within the Oval Office. And then, no, I'm not looking for any applause. I'm looking to make what I believe to be really important points I've been trying to make for 35 years. It's the passion of my life. What disturbs me the most is that knowing that a fellow didn't get clearance because of allegations and proof of sexual abuse and stay-away orders years earlier. The rationale apparently was, I don't know, it apparently was what you see in the press, but he did a good job. He was really good at his job. I just read, before I walked on stage, a statement from the president saying he wishes him luck. He has so much talent. That's like saying that axe murderer out there, he's a great painter. No, translate this into everyday terms. Is there any other crime, and it's a crime, where there be an explanation that the reason why we shouldn't pay attention to the transgression is because they're good at something? The one thing I've been saying for 35 years and no one wanted to hear is abusers are equal opportunity employers. They're poor guys. They're wealthy guys. They're doctors. They're lawyers. They're politicians. They're creative artists. And so, folks, over the past months, the disgusting behavior and conduct of powerful men in Hollywood and in politics and in the media has been exposed. Men who have had power over scores of women and their careers Men who abuse that power in a disgusting and immoral way. But because of the bravery of so many courageous women speaking up, putting their careers at risk to save other women from similar fate, these men are now beginning to be held accountable. But it just doesn't happen to celebrities or young actresses. It happens in every single industry, in every circumstance where a man has the power to affect the career of a woman. It can be in a plumbing company or in a great university. It doesn't matter. So we got to rip this Band-Aid all the way off and understand whether you work in a fast food restaurant or in the White House, whether you work in Hollywood or you work at the local landfill, the men who have power over your careers many times abuse that power. And to end this abuse, it's absolutely necessary that other men begin to speak up and stand up, to show some courage and some dignity, to intervene, to condemn. Because, gentlemen, as I said earlier, your silence is complicity. The only way we're going to change the culture is if everyone takes a stand. Because, look, the vast majority of men in America are not abusers. The overwhelming majority are not abusers. But until they are labeled, the abusers are labeled the pariah that they are, this cultural phenomenon is going to continue. I imagine this audience, some of you know what the phrase rule of thumb means. How many know what it is? Raise your hand. You're one of the few audiences. Back in the 1300s, late 1300s in England, the courts of common law, too many women were being killed by their husbands who chastised them because they were property, allowed to chastise, quote, your woman. The court came along and said, we're not going to outlaw you chastising your woman, but you can no longer chastise your woman with a rod bigger than the circumference of your thumb. This is a cultural problem, endemic in our culture that still hasn't been wiped out. But we have a chance now. Unlike any time in history, we have a chance. That's why I wrote The Violence Against Women 28 years ago. If you doubt this is a national matter, let me explain what happened when I first sat down and wrote that legislation. I was told, first of all, that no one would pay attention. Initially, not a single women's group supported me. National Organization of Women, any women's group, because they thought it would draw attention away from abortion rights and gender rights. I put my progressive credentials above alongside anybody. I'm the guy who said, I don't need to evolve. I think men should be able to marry men and women should be able to marry women. And I believe that since I've been 13 years old when I was with my father and he turned and looked at me as I watched two men kiss. And I looked at my dad. Excuse me, I was 17 years old. I looked at my dad and he said, Joey, it's simple. They love each other. So I take a back seat to no one on my progressive values. But, initially I got no support. Although others had tried, they had never gotten anywhere in legislation. And so, finally, because of a brave, bright woman who's the head of NOW, National Organization for Women, Ellie Schmiel, she finally went at a conference of all the 7 major women's groups and civil rights groups in the country. She said, what are we doing? Why aren't we helping this guy? And everything began to change. When the Violence Against Women Act, for example, contained women's shelters for women who were being abused, they were characterized in the mainstream press as Biden was setting up indoctrination centers for women's lib. This is 20-some years ago. I was told by most conservative clerics and very conservative religious groups that I was interfering in family matters. The government had no right to interfere. It was a family matter. It was private. And I guess I caused some problems when I said, we're going to rip the Band-Aid off. The dirty little secret that your parents and my parents, we all knew was going on. And so, in order to get this moving, I knew we had to do what you young women did today. I knew we had to go out and find some truly brave women who would stand before the country and the nation and before my committee and say what happened to them, knowing what would follow on and happen to them. One of the first people to come forward, and I sat with her before, and to warn her what would happen to her, was a beautiful in every way, inside and out, model named Marla Hanson from New York. She lived in an apartment complex. She wanted to go from an efficiency to a one-bedroom apartment. Every time she'd go to her landlord, he'd hit on her. So finally, she left the complex. It was I think in the East 80s in Manhattan, a very upscale complex. She was on a shoot one day in New York, got notice she kept trying to get her security deposit back. He said, if you come back to the restaurant bar after work, which is in the bottom of the apartment complex, I'll give it to you. She came back, he hit on her again. She got up and walked out. He'd hired 2 thugs. You know what they did? They slashed her face with razors. I asked her, what did your girlfriend say? They said, what were you wearing? What did your mother say? Why did you go to a bar? A brilliant young woman who went to a small Catholic college just north of Pittsburgh. A freshman. My second witness. There was no football team, but a soccer team, and so they had a bonfire for the first game on Friday night for the first game on Saturday, a pep rally. She went to the rally. It was cold, and she was going back to her dorm. It was dark, and a boyfriend of a girl she went to high school with back home, said, I'll walk you back to your dorm. On the way to the dorm, he said, can I stop and get my coat out of my dorm? She walked in with him, he pulled her in a room, and he raped her. I'll never forget what she said. She said, I went running back to my room. I was on the 4th floor. I ran in and ran up, took all my clothes off, and ran in the bathroom, took a scalding shower. I'll never forget the phrase. She said, I took a scalding shower. I came out, I was sitting at the end of my bed crying, and my RA came in. A woman said, what happened? I said, I told her. And she said, you've been raped. And I said, no, I knew him. I knew him. think of the cultural saturation that would have a brilliant young woman say, no, it's not the same. I knew him. They added that someone wasn't leaping out of an alley and brutally raping her means it wasn't that serious. When in fact, all the psychiatrists and psychologists who testified in 1,000 hours of hearings I had and now is taken for granted, the most difficult abuse to recover from is the abuse of someone you know, at the hands of someone you know and someone you trust. That's harder to recover from than the same exact abuse by a total stranger. How many of you lovely young victims, men and women, have had someone say to you, well, what did you do? How many have asked themselves, what did I say? What did I do to provoke this? And that was one of the first things I had to try to overcome, to explain to people. It's never, and I mean it's not figuratively, literally, it's never, 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 never the woman's fault, no matter what she does. No, I'm being literal now. Let me make it clear. You can say, I want to go to bed with you and get in bed and change your mind. You can be the one. One of you could stand up here, strip stark naked, and walk down the middle of here, and no man has a right to touch you. You can be arrested for indecent exposure, but nobody has a right to touch you. Period. No, I mean it literally. And by the way, unless consent can be given, it is a crime. It is a flat crime. But all these women went through the vicious court of public opinion. They got judged and rejudged. But they had the courage to come forward. Then Nita Hill came forward, knowing that she would be pilloried for saying she had been harassed. But because of brave women like this, they began to break down the barrier, encouraging other women to step up. It took enormous courage to begin to change this environment. But we're still having trouble at the time to getting this bill passed. So we had to make another point to show how embedded this prejudice was. Brilliant young staff I had in the Judiciary Committee decided to do something called go out and look at the laws in every single state that dealt with violence against women. My state of Delaware is a progressive state. In the state of Delaware, there's a law that said, if God forbid, you're walking down an alley, a street tonight, and somebody jumps out of an alley and brutally rapes you, in my state, you can be charged with first-degree rape. But if the guy you go out on a date with does the exact same thing to you, you cannot be charged with first-degree rape. Implicit in the culture is you must have known something. You must have done something to trigger it. Imagine that. Same exact physical abuse. But if you knew him, in one state, the law was if a man came home and found his wife in bed with another man, he could shoot. It was justified homicide. If a woman came home and found her husband in bed with another woman, it was murder. We dissected 50 states. My colleagues looked and said, oh, God, I didn't know this. But again, think of the cultural norms built into these unfair laws. people started to pay attention. We made a lot of progress. We made a lot of progress since the passage of the bill. Violence against women is down 63%. More women are reporting the crime and getting help. The law has built more than 2,000 domestic violence shelters and rape centers. Every state in the union, almost every city, there's hundreds of laws now to protect victims, and every major city has a special victims unit, trained detectives and advocates. We've saved the country by every serious study, an estimated $12 billion in aggravated social cost. Made a lot of progress. But when I got elected vice president, the president asked me, did I have any requests? I said, yeah, I want the Violence Against Women's Office, which is in the Justice Department, to come in under my control as vice president. Because the attorney generals were generous, they didn't object, so I hired the people who were going to run this operation. And I kept tabs on from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, reports all crimes. What kind of progress we make? And Cynthia Hogan, a brilliant lawyer, she's the one that the NFL ended up hiring after that jerk dragged his wife out of the elevator by the hair. By the way, 5 years earlier, no one would have done anything about it. But because of you and a lot of other people, things that society is changing. So she went over and checked out the progress. She came back with information that just absolutely, it stunned me. Yeah, we made a lot of progress, except for girls and women between the ages of 14 and 24, there's been virtually no progress. The statistics were even more alarming, since in the meantime we learned, and we knew, that God forbid, if you're raped or abused once, you are 3 times as likely to be raped and abused a second time. You know the statistics. 1 in 5 women in college will be sexually assaulted. It's higher for transgender individuals and for bisexual women. And it's not over when the attacks end. Rape and sexual assault have long-lasting effects. When I wrote the bill, I said I believe there's women who suffer traumatic encounters of attacks from one they know or don't know are going to suffer from post-traumatic stress just like the military does. Everybody thought I was making it up just to make my case. The Center for Disease Control 2 years ago wrote an extensive study showing that's exactly right. Traumatic stress, post-traumatic stress syndrome, a greater disposition to chronic health problems, weakening your immune system, higher rates of heart disease. Victims have much higher ratios of chronic disease like asthma, diabetes, gastrointestinal disorders. But here's the thing. We decided, what are we going to do about this? I mean, I was devastated. I was so proud of what we had done. And I would have thought generationally it would have been much different. But it wasn't. And I believe for a long time, although I'm a great supporter of higher education, I believe for a long time, college presidents and administrators are turning a blind eye to what their obligation is. So I went to Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education. We decided we're going to use Title IX. Your universities get hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government. Title IX says we have to treat men like women. They have an obligation to protect you on campus. We ended up bringing before us over 158 universities. We found out that the university was doing the same thing, and some of you had this experience. You go to report to the university what happened, and You'll have an administrator say to you, well, what were you wearing? Were you drunk? Where was it? Was it at a fraternity? Did you know them? The most educated sector of the populace committing the same cultural problems that were happening, that we had learned through women's shelters that were just wrong to begin with. I had a meeting with 100 college presidents. I pushed hard to tell them they have to change what happens on their campus. You have to have your own victims unit on campus. You have to have people trained when a young woman comes forward. I'll bet if I went through this crowd, you can give me examples where one reported to a university, you've been told, you don't want to ruin this young man's career. You don't want to throw him out of school. You know, if you cheat on an exam, I'm a college professor now, and I taught in law school for 21 years. If I have someone cheating on an exam, they can get thrown out of school for that. I don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt with a jury that you cheated, but by the preponderance of evidence. So now you have a new sector of education undoing all the limitations on colleges and requirements put on college, Secretary DeVos, because somehow there should be a standard that's in the law, beyond a reasonable doubt. Second thing I did was to reach out to college students and high school students with a virtual town meeting. I was told there were over 30,000 people on the first call. And I asked, what recommendations do you have for me is what we can do to make things safer for you? And I thought I was pretty informed, but I was almost embarrassed I hadn't focused on what they had said. I gave them a website to go to, and the overwhelming spontaneous response from these 30,000 students was, get men involved. Such a simple, self-evident notion. Men on campus have to take more responsibility to change the culture. So I called up athletes and celebrities, guys like David Beckham, the great soccer player, and others, and I asked them to appear with me in a series of public service announcements that were played at major sporting events, the Final Four, a whole range of issues. And then the President and I launched a thing called It's On Us. Going to college camps, I've been to scores where the crowd show up like this, somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 show up. And I asked the men in the audience to take the pledge, a literal pledge, to stand up, to speak up. I called on all of you, and you're already doing it, I assume, you men that are here, to step up at the bar or the fraternity party or in the dorm room when you hear denigrating discussion about women. Most of you in college wouldn't stand for it here in denigrating discussions about African Americans or about Asians, because it breeds this contempt. You've been in more locker rooms than I have, but all this stuff about you hear this in locker rooms, you don't hear it in locker rooms. But you got to speak up. Look, we've gotten celebrities, major companies, sports leagues, leading broadcasters to participate and show everyone can help prevent this heinous crime from happening. We've held over 3,300 events on campus in every state in this union in the last several years. Schools have created their own It's On Us public service announcements, reaching millions of people online, at football games, basketball games, sporting events. Tomorrow at the Army-Navy men's and women's basketball games at West Point, we'll be featuring It's on Us. More than 440,000 students have taken the pledge I've asked them to take so far, that they will intervene when they see it. 2 years ago, Lady Gaga, who was brutally victimized, she's come out with what's happened to her, finally. Not finally, but I mean, she's had the courage to do it. She wrote a song, Until It Happens to You, was nominated for the Academy Award. She asked me if I would introduce her at the Academy Awards and talk about this issue in the introduction for a few minutes. Over 210 million people worldwide responded. 210 million. And millions more hundreds of thousands more took the pledge. So I'm here with you today because fraternities are a significant source of the solution and the problem. And the problem. I'm not going to color this because you're all here. Any of you guys, and you've seen it, see a freshman co-ed at a party, drunk out of her mind, and one of your brothers or roommates walking her up the stairs. If you do not intervene, you are a coward. You are complicitous. And ladies, that's not an easy thing for a man to do, because sometimes intervening with someone is twice their size. Not a joke. If you can't physically intervene, at least sound the alarm. And you women, you sorority sisters, you know the deal. The person most often gone to by a victim immediately after it happens is one of her friends. And not nearly enough of you are helpful. You empathize, you sympathize, you either don't know what to tell her to do, or you don't want to get involved in encouraging her to go forward to do what she has to do. You have an obligation, the same obligation these men have, to get engaged. I could hear in the back, not clearly, but some of it went on, you all talking. You guys have to raise hell on your campus if your campus does not have adequate protection and or adequate recourse on the campus. You have to speak up. Go to the president of the university. Go to the administrators. Insist that. Because that's what's going to change it. You both have obligations. I know you want to be the best brothers and sisters you can possibly be. This is part of the deal. Folks, it comes down to a simple proposition. We have to change the culture on campuses and in society as a whole. And what's acceptable. We have to change the standard of decency by which we measure ourselves. And that standard should be measure ourselves by any time an assault, any time assent is not or cannot be given. It's a crime. It's rape. This isn't abstract. These are your friends, your brothers, your sisters, in some cases your literal blood sisters and blood brothers. This is about the women, the men, the gay, the straight, the transgender classmate down the hall, in your dorm, in your classes, on your team. It's about the high school girl who hasn't yet shown up on campus, is dreaming about her first semester on college. That dream could be shattered forever unless you change the environment on college campuses. Ask your parents, first day they dropped you off on your college campus, what did they most worry about? They worried about you're going to be able to do the work? They're able to worry about whether or not you're going to like it? That may be a little bit of it. But they ask themselves, in an environment that should be the safest in the world, is she going to be safe? Is she going to be safe? Look, folks, I apologize I get so engaged in this. But here's the deal. We have an obligation to get engaged. As I said, it isn't abstract, it's real. And this is one of the most encouraging things that I've seen. 4,000 of you around the country here deciding you're going to take hold by taking the very institutions which in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s were viewed as the biggest part of the problem. You're going to use them as the biggest engine for solution. We have an ambitious plan for It's On Us this year. Our Greek Leadership Council is made up of 12 organizations that are leading sexual assault prevention nationwide. And I want to ask the members of that organization to stand and be recognized. All of you who are part of that organization that are here today, stand and be recognized. Come on, stand up, man. We need you. We need more of you. The Greek Leadership Council is going to challenge students in the Greek life to do better. These fraternities and sororities, brothers and sisters, are hopefully going to be leading the charge so that when you're sending your child to college, the last thing you have to worry when you drop her off is whether she's going to be physically safe, any more than she'd be physically safe walking the streets of her hometown. So, ladies and gentlemen, I really think we have a chance for the first time since I've been engaged in this to begin to change the culture. Things that are happening now would have never happened even 5, 10 years ago. Would have never even made the press. I really mean it. People are now going, I guess I gotta look. I can't pretend it's not happening anymore. Because the vast majority of women and men are decent and honorable. But the only way we're going to put a stop to it. And by the way, I'll conclude by saying there's never going to be an end to violence. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, society's like a wave. The wave moves on, but the particles remain the same. God's not made a new brand of man or woman in a millennium. But the press always asks me, Biden, you've been fighting this fight for over 35 years. What constitutes success? I can tell you what success is, and it's within our reach. Success is when a woman who is abused never, ever, ever asked herself, what did I do? Never asked herself, what did I do? And when every man in America never asks himself, I have a right to do this, don't I? She's my woman. She's your equal. She is as relevant as you are. So, folks, the biggest change is we're shifting. When women speak up now, society is listening. And instead of dismissing, they're giving the benefit of the doubt. That's a gigantic change. Keep it going. And it's all about your kids being able to look back. It sounds corny, but look back at you 25 years from now and say, they did it. They did it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So